Hello. The subject of our discussion now is pawn endings, elementary pawn endings, and the simplest pawn ending we can possibly have, the simplest, when one side has king and pawn and the other side has just a king. Those positions are always with a set result, meaning there are some positions are clear win and some positions are clear draw. So there is no maybes. There are no maybes. There are maybe there are no side possibilities. If both sides play correctly, there's only one result should be expected. So let's try to get to the very simplest types of this position, the simplest type of this position. Position, the simplest, black king on e8, white king on d6, and pawn on e6. What is the result in this position? It's very simple. If whites move, white plays e7 and wins after king f7, king d7. That's very simple. However, if the blacks move, then black plays king d8, and position is a draw since after e7, black goes back king e8, and if white plays king d5, king e7, king e5, black has to choose right square king to e8, and it's a draw. Now, we don't want to spend too much time on it. I want to be as brief as possible. And if we get any position, well, if we move position up, suppose black's king on d5, white's king on d3, and white's pawn on e3. Now, this position is a draw, no matter whose move is it. All black has to do, play king e5, play king e6. Remember, when you have to push back, go back in front of the pawn on the same file, and you can never go wrong if you know this pattern. This pattern is especially important when you are on a 7th rank with a king. You must know only correct ways to go back in front of the white pawn, and then you always have a draw. Now, this is an easy part. Now, very important part of understanding these all pawn endings is the oppositions of the king. Here we have an example: white's king on e4, black's king on e6, and white's pawn on e3. What is the result in this position? The result is like this. If black to play, white wins. If white to play, it's a draw. The reason why, because there is a double opposition of kings. So one king has to give up the opposition and let the other king penetrate. Well, or they will let the white king penetrate. If it black's move, wherever black moves the king, white's king penetrates on the other side. On king d6, king f5. On king e7, now king e5. And white king continue penetrating. For example, on king f7, king d6. And eventually, white wins this pawn. However, if it's in original position, if it's white's move on king d4, king d6, and black wins the opposition. This is the simplest example of opposition in pawn endings. Later on, we're going to go to much more complicated aspects of this opposition and more complicated examples, but this is the simplest one. So we know this. Now, this more or less concludes the basics of knowing king and pawn versus king. Now, one little addition to this, if we put the white king on e4 and black's king on e6 and white's pawn on e2, not on e3. Now, this position is winning for white no matter whose move is it. Because we know if it's black's move, white has an opposition, and that's why they win. But if it's white's move, then white plays e3 waiting move, and black still has an opposition. Now, this is very simple, and we know the result that white wins with pawn on e2. So this practically concludes of all we have to know about the opposition with the king and pawn versus king. But there are more sophisticated position and more complicated position on this matter. The reason why those positions are so important, but you can say, hey, once I get this ending, I can figure it out on my own whether this is winning or not. But you have to know it way before you get those positions, those endgames. And you have to know whether you should go for that position or not. Let me give you one simple example. White's king on e1 and white's pawn on g4 and black's king on c8. So now we know with white and playing black, both sides know that you should try to get an opposition and you should try to get king in front of the pawn. Now, what should white try to do? To try to get king in front of the pawn and win the opposition. Let's see if they can do that. King on e1, pawn on g4, and black's king on c8. We go king f2, king d7, king f3, for example, king e6, and you see that this is not possible, and white does not achieve the goal. On king e4, king f6, king f4, and white does not do anything where they cannot get king in front of the pawn and the opposition at the same time. Just to get king in front of the pawn will not do, because if white goes at some point can make king on g5 and black can make king on g7, it will be a draw. However, white has one tricky way to win this position. They go king f2, and after king d7, king g3, king e6, and here, instead of going king f4, white goes king h4. You see, white tries to come over from the right side, from the king side. Now black has to rush king f6. Now white goes king h5 and tries to play king h6, after which pawn is going to queen. So, and black must stop it by playing king g7, and when white plays king g5, we have exact position that we talked just a minute ago. It's opposition, and it's black's move, so white wins. So we know that this opposition, this position that we got just now, it's winning with, if it's black's move, and it's draw if it's white's move. We can move position one square up or down, depends on which side you look, with white king on g4, pawn on g3, black king on g6. And the same rule applies here. If black moves, it's a loss for black, and if white moves, it's a draw. So this, we can move to the right, to the left. Same rule applies everywhere, except for one particular position. When black's king stands on the back rank, and we have, suppose, black's king on d6, white king on